Hey everybody. Thanks for that. I wasn't expecting cheeseburger in paradise, so I'm sorry for singing along there. My old Jimmy Buffett roots showing. So wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar today. This is pretty exciting, pretty awesome space, fungi and food tech. Have some incredible panelists lined up today. And for those of you that know us and love us, our limited partners, founders, extended PML family, Fund 3 LPs, welcome to the webinar today. For those of you that don't know us but have joined for the fungi, we are a deep tech venture investing firm, Prime Movers Lab, work across 6 thematic areas: manufacturing, transportation, energy, infrastructure, agriculture, and human augmentation, and really have been doing quite a deep dive into the food space, as evidenced by some of our other webinars. One of the most important things for us with these webinars is really to share some of the work that we've been doing in landscaping and understanding and connecting with founders and experts in this space. And so this is really our chance to share with you some of the things that we've been discovering and really have a great conversation around that. Really one of the things we love to do is bring together industry experts. We have 3 of them today, really want to share their insights with you. So we'll turn it over very quickly. And obviously, for those of you that don't know me, although I think a lot of people recognize me now from our webinars, is I'm a general partner here at the fund. My background is neuroscience. I have a PhD in neuroscience and had a really interesting career trajectory. I've been at DARPA, have been in the defense industry, and most recently scientific co-founder, and now an investor here at Prime Movers Lab. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping. So we will keep this to 1 hour. We are pretty tight about that. Please use the chat or the Q&A for any questions. Brad and I will monitor that. You don't have to worry that we don't see it. We're always got our eye on those. So if you have a question, we'll try to weave it in, or we can also work them in at the end. And then now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Brad, who's going to kick us off here. Brad, if you want to do a quick intro and then get us rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Pruente. I'm a partner at Prime Movers Lab. Like Amy, I come from an operator background. I worked at a Y Combinator company in the semiconductor manufacturing industry for about 7 years before coming here and becoming an investor. I've spent the last 1.5 years here really focusing on the future of agriculture and the future of food tech with Amy, with some of our other colleagues, and really excited to talk about fungi and mycelium today. Where I come at this from, my perspective is that our existing industrial agriculture system has done really well at a lot of things. Eating a cheeseburger for a couple of dollars or eating fresh fruit in the middle of winter is a sign that it's doing a lot of the things it's been designed to do. That said, I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and people like Paul and Isabella are working every day to do that. And then people like Maya and investors like Peakbridge are funding those innovations. So with that, let's have each of you introduce yourselves. Maya, do you want to start?
Sure. So great to be here. Really a pleasure. Thanks for inviting. So my name is Schushan. I'm a CTO and principal at Peakbridge. Peakbridge is a group of funds investing only in food tech. We're food tech experts. We invest in seed and growth stages through 2 separate funds. We're now actually raising our second growth fund together with Rothschild, very close to first close. My background is a PhD in computational biology and biochemistry, and I've been working in agri-food tech and business development and investment for 10 years now. At Peakbridge for 8 months. And again, it's a pleasure working with such an amazing team that does everything to make really food more sustainable, working on really helping our portfolio. So this is us in a nutshell.
Thanks, Maya. Isabella, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Isabella. I'm the CEO and founder of Bosque Foods. We're using solid state fermentation to cultivate mycelium, and we use that to then create whole cut meat alternatives like chicken and pork fillets. So that's what our focus is at the moment. My background is in sustainable agriculture, but I spent most of my career helping to build startups in the US, in Europe, and then in Asia, most recently for ag tech startup Infarm before starting Bosque Foods. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least, Paul.
Thank you, Brad, and thanks to our friends at PML. I'm a big fan of all the prime movers and shakers out there, so I'm grateful to be a part of it, and it's really wonderful to be on with you two, Dr. Kruse and Isabella and Maya. Thank you very much. I'm really eager to be chatting with you all. So my name is Paul Shapiro. I'm the CEO and the co-founder of the Better Meat Co. We are a 4-year-old food tech company based in Sacramento, California, and we use microbial fermentation, where we take little tiny microscopic fungi and we subject them to a fermentation that creates amazing whole food meat substitutes that are not only animal free, but they are higher in protein than eggs, higher in iron than beef, and they don't require almost any resources at all to produce. And so in the same way, if you think about, you feed a cow, let's say corn in a feedlot, you end up through a fermentation process inside of the cow's body getting a steak. Well, it takes over a year of feeding the cow though before you get the steak. With us, we inoculate our fermenter, and less than 20 hours later, we are harvesting our steaks. And so we are doing this as a way to help slash humanity's footprint on the planet, to create a greener planet, because we all know about the problems of raising animals for food and how it's driving deforestation, wildlife extinction, climate change, and more. And we want to be a part of the solution, along with companies like Bosque and others who are leading this effort to reduce humanity's reliance on animals for food.
Thanks, Paul. So to kick off, Maya, I want to go to you. You wrote a great blog post about this a couple months ago. Would you start by just telling us a little bit about what fungi are and what mycelium are?
Sure. So indeed, the basic terminology is important here before we do really a more deep dive into the actual applications in food tech. So fungi is a separate life kingdom, means fungi species are distinct from animals and bacteria, and they actually form their own evolutionary branch in the tree of life. This is due to distinguishing properties from animals and bacteria. There are more than 150,000 types of fungi. Actually, these are the same ones that grow on some people's feet. But again, they also do other things. They live with crops, for example, and again, it's a huge diversity. And I think this is a key to the kind of huge potential in food and in general of these organisms, let's say, this kind of distinct branch of life. Yeast, for example, is a type of fungi. But if you talk about fungi, we also have to drill down into the parts of the fungi and how this relates to food. So actually, the fungi, its main body is composed of strands of cells, really thin and long cells, which I call hyphae. That hyphae branch together below the surface of the ground to form a massive network of cells, which is the mycelium. So you can think about the fungi. You have this, again, the body, which is the hyphae, forming together the mycelium. And above the ground, there's the part all of us know as a mushroom. That is actually the budding part, the reproductive structure. So when you talk about mycelium, we're actually talking about part of the fungi in which we usually not used to seeing or eating, because we are more focused about the mushroom. But it is essentially part of the same, species, and it's eatable in the same way the mushroom is. So this is kind of the basic terminology that can help us really understand the potential. And I think what is very special about these mycelium is the fact that, again, it's highly nutritious, it's really high in protein and other also really interesting properties. And moreover, its texture. So again, because they have these thin cells that are really elongated and then branching between them, you get really a texture that is similar to meat without doing any processing. So this is part of the key interest of the industry, as mycelium is a new source of alternative protein.
Thank you, Maya.
Sure.
For my first kind of real question, I'm going to ask this as kind of a hybrid, and I'll start with you, Isabella. Being a devil's advocate, why do we need alternatives to chicken and pork and steak? They taste delicious. They're on the supermarket now. They're, at least until a month or two ago, they weren't very expensive. And then what brought you to this problem specifically?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Paul really, kicked it off there, where animal agriculture, it's one of the leading contributors to climate change and to environmental degradation. So raising livestock in particular, whether it's chicken or beef or lamb or whatever animal meat you're talking about, it has a very high carbon footprint. And it's not a very efficient way of actually producing protein, which is what Paul was alluding to there, in that we can actually cultivate different types of microorganisms that can be much more efficient producers of the type of nutrition that people need, right? So instead of taking a year or 2 years to raise a cow, you can grow fungi, certain types of fungi, in maybe a matter of days or a matter of hours in the case of the Better Meat Co. And so there's better ways to be able to create the same type of nutrition, the same type of, maybe protein products that can feed people and can also check all the boxes for consumers in terms of creating a tasty product and having something that is also meat-like, without having to, one, have that type of carbon footprint, contribute to environmental degradation. And then there's a lot of other reasons as well. I mean, I come from the camp of people who don't think that animal products are necessarily good for humans as well. There's certain ways that those are impacting people's health. So, when I first started thinking about starting Bozque Foods, I looked at the gamut of alternative protein and really thought about, okay, do I want to start something that's more of a cultured meat startup? And one of the main reasons why I decided not to go down that direction was, I took a step back for a second and said, why would I be creating a meat product if I inherently don't believe that meat is necessarily completely good for humans, right? Maybe we can create something better. And not everybody believes in that side of it, but there's a lot of reasons why I think we have the need for these types of alternative protein products. So if you take, human health, if you take environmental reasons, those are, I think, some of the biggest reasons. But I think one of your questions, or people often ask me, especially because we're working with mushroom strains, they ask, well, what about tofu? What about like certain alternatives that are the traditional fermentation products? And I love those. those are the products that I eat and have been staples for me for almost like 2 decades now. But at the end of the day, not every consumer wants those, right? And it's proven because there is a vast majority of people who just prefer to eat meat, right? So as much as, vegetarians and vegans can adopt those products and are really happy to, we need to create better products that can appeal to mass consumers in order to help them make the switch to more of a plant-based diet, or just maybe in our case, fungi-based diet as well. To really move the marker and try and lower the carbon footprint of the animal agriculture industry. So I could talk about this for days, but those are some of the biggest reasons why I think we need these types of products, and just in general, alternative proteins. Yeah.
Paul, do you have anything you want to add there? I know you have your own reasons for going into this.
Well, so I echo everything that Isabella very eloquently pointed out, and I might go further as well and just say what I would maybe say less diplomatically, which is that the #1 cause of wildlife extinction in the world is raising animals for food. The #1 cause of deforestation in the world is raising animals for food. The United Nations put out a report in which they said, the report is called Preventing the Next Pandemic, and it's all about the ways that we might have another pandemic. #1 on the UN list of reasons we might have another pandemic, increasing demand for animal protein. #2 on their list of reasons we might have another pandemic, intensification of agriculture, so confining animals in smaller and smaller spaces. #3 on their list, the bushmeat trade, so slaughtering wildlife for meat. According to the United Nations, the numbers 1, 2, and 3 reasons we're likely to have yet another pandemic all relate to humanity's desire to eat meat. I would be thrilled if people wanted to eat tofu. I, like Isabella, love eating tofu. I eat tofu on a daily basis. It's amazing. I'd be thrilled if we could do marketing campaigns to increase adoption of tofu. At the same time, I would also be thrilled if people wanted to walk and bike more, but people seem to really want to drive. So we need to make cars that don't rely on fossil fuels. And people really want meat. And meat demand is going up, not down. It's going up in the United States, up in China, up in Brazil, up in India, up in Mexico, all the places it's going to matter the most in the future. Meat demand is going up, not down. And so we have to find a way to satiate humanity's meat tooth that doesn't involve animals. And that's why I think it's so important that we have these options, whether it be plant-based meat or fungi-based meat, and yes, animal cell cultured meat too. I think all of these are important parts of the alt meat portfolio. In the same way, we don't want just wind or just solar or just geothermal or just nuclear. We want all of those. We want lots of alternatives to meat, and there will be a more diverse portfolio of protein sources in the future that we will have to select from.
Thank you. Maya, Isabella just mentioned that vast majority of people like eating meat, and Paul talked about how demand is increasing. Is this a big enough space to be venture investable? I mean, how big is this market? Is it growing fast enough? How do you think about that as an investor?
Sure. First, maybe going back to the previous question, I would say we talked about, ethical rationale that people don't want to eat, and then because of the damage for the environment and, because the care of their animals. We talked about all the sustainability reason. We talked about health. But I think in the short term, these are the key motivation. But in the long term, it's kind of, let's say it's cliche, but we will not have enough protein to feed the world. And this is something we all should keep in mind, that as the population eats more protein, it becomes a bigger part of our diet. At 2050, it will be, demand has to be 70%, the supply has to be 70% higher, and the animal just won't do the trick. So all of these other considerations are important for the short term, but in the long term, it will be about supply. And I think from economical reason, this is kind of the greatest motivator in the world. It's not going to be enough, so any other source has to be developed. But this, putting that aside, if you're talking about the market, so you can think about the market from a Mycelium-based product as a new approach for alternative meat, as we're discussing. So the alternative meat market today is only 1% of the total meat market, which means it's about $14 billion. But the expectation is that by 2030, it will be much higher, ranging between 8, 10, 15%, but taking a much bigger chunk of the entire meat market. So this is kind of the space we are at. We see it's growing, we see different approaches. We can say that today the main alternative is the plant-based, and we can talk a lot about plant-based and what's going on there. And whereas cultivated is still, let's say, more like an R&D effort and not a market yet. So Mycelium can be like the third alternative, which is a bit of a hybrid between the two of them. On one hand, it's been in the market. You have corn, you have everything, it's not something new. But on the other hand, there's so much development that can be done and innovation that can emerge that brings it to the next level of protein, the whole cuts these amazing people are developing. So I see it as a hybrid between the plant-based and the cultured meat in terms of, let's say, maturity level. And in terms of potential, as we discussed, the limit, it's huge, It's endless in the sense if you're taking a chunk of the meat market.
I like that chunk of the meat market. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that phrase. Maybe one thing, talking about this emerging as kind of this hybrid space, one of the things that I think maybe some people, I certainly have the question around is sort of like, what's the technology here? Like, what's changed? Are we seeing a breakthrough in the mycelium space in terms of how we're able to sort of grow and access these proteins? Maybe Isabella and maybe then Paul, you could both chime in around, because you're both using two different approaches. Like, why now? What's the breakthrough here?
Yeah, Paul, maybe I'll just jump in and then hand it over to you. So for me, I'm like fascinated just by the fermentation pillar of the alternative protein industry, because I love all things fermentation. That's a bit of my background, but I think liquid fermentation for me is really what's seen as like industrial biotechnology fermentation, and that's Paul, I don't want to speak for you, but that's more of the camp that I think Paul in the Better Meat Co is sitting in, where just very, very dumbing this down, but like you're producing mycelium, for example, in fermentation tanks in a liquid media, maybe not exactly the same technology as corn, but around that similar concept, right? And, of course, different strains, but what corn did was, they pioneered mycoprotein and bringing, that type of liquid fermentation for the use of producing protein or food products, decades ago. And what they have done is really, they produce their mycelium more as an input to what I see as the traditional process for producing meat alternatives. So, I'm not going to speak for corn, but I imagine they're producing a mycelium that they input into a process that is similar to extrusion, and they extrude their products that are mixed in with other types of ingredients. What we're doing is quite different. And what I find fascinating about this particular part of the industry is that there's so many different types of fermentation that are now kind of fitting into this scope, right? There's traditional fermentation where you have companies that are almost taking a fresh approach on tempeh, right? You also have koji-based products, which are also based on the traditional fermentation process, and really using koji, which is this Aspergillus oryzae strain. And then there's what we're doing, which is solid state fermentation, and it very much differs from the liquid state approach. So, in a nutshell, what we do is we take a solid substrate instead of a liquid media. We inoculate it with our fungi, and then we basically put it and kind of how do you say, we put it through an environmental condition so that it thinks that it's growing under the ground, or it thinks that it's maybe growing in a tree trunk. So we kind of hack the biological process, and we then essentially force it to grow pure mycelium in structures that we then harvest and use as meat alternatives almost in its intact form. So that may sound kind of complicated, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create pure edible mycelium instead of a composite, right? So if you look at tempeh, for example, I think of that as a composite, so it's mycelium growing around, for example, pulses or beans or legumes or, of some sort. And then it is this product that is, if you cut it, you can see the bean, right? What we were trying to do is, help consumers wrap their heads around something and bring it a little bit closer to meat, right? We're not trying to replicate meat on a cellular basis. We're not trying to look like a steak. We're trying to be much more natural approach to meat alternatives. But what we do is we cultivate pure mycelium. And then once we harvest it, it's very lightly processed just through culinary techniques to get it to something that has a meat-like texture, a meat-like taste, and can kind of check the boxes on the sensory experience for consumers. Of course, we're very far away from, or, we're a few years away from commercialization, I'd say. But even today, we have prototypes that we're showcasing with investors. And, even at what I'm excited about is that even at this very early stage, I can see that there's so much promise just for solid state fermentation, and I'm not even talking about liquid state or precision fermentation, which is, for me, like entirely other worlds. But yeah, Paul, maybe I'll hand it over to you so you can maybe speak more eloquently about your approach. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't presume that I could speak more eloquently, but I would say they are different. And so first, Dr. K, thank you for this awesome question. I just want to tip my hat to corn because Isabella mentions them, but they're the OGs of this space. We talk about this as if like this new thing, and there's lots of new things that are happening, but corn has been doing this, as Isabella mentioned, for decades. I mean, it's truly incredible what they've done, and they've shown that you can have a successful mycelium fermentation business that's scaled up at an industrial level and that people would like to eat it. They just announced their new partnership in Europe with KFC. So it's already happening. The difference is, imagine in the plant-based world, though, if there was only one company that made plant-based meat and they only used soy as one example. We all know, though, that there are thousands of species of plants. And so now you have plant-based meat that's made from soy, made from pea, made from wheat, made from chickpea, made from fava bean, and so on. In fact, the new Beyond Meat jerky is primarily fava bean based. So, or excuse me, it's mung bean based, I'm sorry, but there's other fava bean ones too. And so imagine if all you had was one company and it was just soy and that was it. That's the equivalent of what happens in the mycelium space right now. 100% of the mycelium-based meat substitutes that are produced right now are produced by corn. They have a complete monopoly on the mycoprotein market. And good for them. I mean, you have to take your hat off to them. At the same time, just like there are thousands of species of plants that you can make alternative meats with, there are thousands of species of fungi that you can do it with too. And there's lots of different ways that you can process those fungi to make them more meat-like. Some of them are going to be like what Isabella is doing in a solid state fermentation. The benefits of that are that you don't need to buy all this CapEx intensive stainless steel and so on. The detriment is that it grows a lot slower. And so you're spending days or weeks growing as opposed to hours. Where if you're doing submerged liquid fermentation, like what we at the Better Meat Co do, you do have the CapEx cost of buying these fermenters, but you end up growing very rapidly. And so you get a higher CapEx, lower OpEx type situation, really. And so what we do is essentially take a microscopic fungi and submerge it in a liquid fermentation where we take agricultural byproducts that have nearly no economic value whatsoever and allow it to feast. And feast it does. When you walk in, as soon as it's inoculated, it's like a liquid. You could just easily, run a strain through it, you get nothing. However, if you come back just 12 hours or 15 hours later and you were to take like a colander and run it through it, it would be chock full of material. That's how fast our organism grows in the conditions that we create. And we've spent 4 years basically optimizing a process with pH, temperature, flow rates, all types of environmental aspects to give our organism what it wants in order to grow fast. At the same time, you still have a situation where none of these are domesticated organisms, not even corn. They've not done any strain optimization. And so imagine a situation like, let's say you were going to start, let's say Isabella wasn't doing, mycelium Bosque, she was doing my Bosque chicken farm, right? And she was using chickens instead of modern strains of chickens who grow to slaughter weight in only 40 days. What if she was using strains from 5,000 years ago who had not really been domesticated, who take 140 days to grow to slaughter weight? That's the equivalent of what Isabella and we at the Better Meat Co are doing. We're using completely wild strains of fungi that have not been domesticated, have not been optimized. And so the sky's the limit. Like what we get now is literally the worst that it will ever be. Because as we continue to optimize our processes and our organisms, we will get better yields, faster growth rates, higher protein accumulation, and more. And so while what we're doing now is very promising and encouraging and frankly cost competitive with beef today, unlike plant-based meats, I think in the future it's going to be even better because as we domesticate these organisms and get them to do more of the things that we want them to do, prices will just crash further.
Wow. I love that. I love that sort of framing around, we're sort of in the stone ages of figuring out how to work with these organisms. Do you see, I mean, maybe sort of open it up here. Do you see the strain development, research and development, and then that seems to me like it's going to open up a whole space for even new companies and new applications in fungi, right? Like this, it seems like we're about to have an explosion in terms of the knowledge and understanding around these strains. Is that how you think about it as you think about both trying to make product, but also trying to add to our knowledge of this space?
For me, yes. I mean, that's one of the things that excites me so much about what we're working on. And sometimes, as a company, like Bozque Foods and like the Better Meat Co, we have to be very focused on producing a product, getting to market, being able to get this in the hands of consumers. But there is a small part of myself that wishes that we could just do strain optimization and just focus on R&D, because like Paul is saying, for me, the way I look at this is we've just scratched the surface, right? And there's almost like fundamental research that has not been done working with fungi, that has been done in the plant kingdom, right? Where, you have so much work that's been done more in plants than on fungi, because fungi was really like kind of brushed under the carpet for decades, and it wasn't getting the funding that other, types of organisms were. So I am very, very excited about that. One of the things for us that I would love us to be able to spend more time on is honestly, we're not doing GMO, and we can't, because obviously that's problematic in certain regions, and so that's not on the table. But working with our organisms just in natural breeding to be able to optimize nutritional content. How about being able to work to optimize our sensory profile, taste profile, texture, just through working with strain development? Those are all things that are possible. They just take time. They take a lot of resources and R&D. But for me, the sky is really the limit. You just need to be able to spend the time. And maybe this, like you said, will open the doors for other companies that are really just focusing on that. I would love to have some sort of system for like high throughput screening of strains, which, for us, doesn't, we screen them as we can, but it takes time. And that, in startup world, 1 month is like a year. So we don't have the time to be able to do that. We have to be laser focused on getting, our formulation, our fermentation process, our strain to the point of almost like the MVP, right? So that we can get on the market and start building this company and getting it in the hands of consumers. But there is definitely a part of me that wishes that we could just be in the lab working on strains. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about it like this, like in the plant world, let's just take wheat as an example. You have some strains of wheat that are really good for beer, others that are really good for pasta, others that are really good for bread, and others are crackers. And these are all different strains that have been bred by plant biologists for the wheat industry to have the same plant create different types of products. Similarly, in the oil industry, you have some plants like that are high oleic and low oleic oils. Soybeans are grown for different types of products, like soybean oil comes from different types of soybeans than what you would get from like edamame, as an example. Same thing with sunflowers. You have some sunflowers that are grown for the seeds, some for the oil. These are different strains of sunflowers. Those are all purposefully bred and domesticated by humans who were paid to do this because there was an industry associated with commercializing wheat or sunflower products and so on. That doesn't exist in our industry. Like, we're using wild harvested organisms. And so I do think there's a huge world of opportunity out there for somebody to come in and create all these strains and test them and say, hey, this is better, let's say, for crab, or this is better for chicken or for steak. And they have different textures, and they might have, maybe one is better for dairy replacement, or this one scrambles like an egg. You create all these different things. And while I am an ardent supporter of using biotechnology to create better food, it doesn't have to be GMO. I'm not against GMO by any means, but it doesn't have to be. If you want to sell in Europe or whatever, that's great. You can do it through natural breeding programs, like what Isabella said, but it takes a long time and it takes a lot of resources. And there are a few companies today that are now engaged in these type of programs, and those are the companies that I think are going to win in the future because they're getting this head start on early domestication programs. The difference is, though, that companies like Isabella's and mine at the Better Meat Co, like, we want to be selling now as well. You'll have some companies in the food biotech space that will just do R&D for 6 or even 10 years. Some of them even make it to unicorn status and they're still pre-revenue. I'm not faulting them. It's good for them and their investors. That's fantastic. But what I want to do at the Better Meat Co is continually improve while at the same time starting to make a dent in the problem today. I'm here in California. Fire season is no longer a season. It's year round. In Pakistan, it's like 120 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Reservoirs are drying up. Like, we just don't have the luxury of waiting another decade to get our R&D right before we start trying to make a dent. And so we have to commercialize these unoptimized strains while at the same time continuing to get strain improvement going so that we can get better in the future. But I'm very optimistic about fungi for a lot of reasons, which we haven't really talked about, but I think that they offer, frankly, a better, more effective way to mimic the taste and texture of meat than plant protein isolates and extrudates do. For a variety of reasons we can get into, I hope, but I just think fungi are the future, and they are going to play an outsized role when it comes to meat replacement.
Yeah. How about you, Maya? What do you, as an investor, sort of looking at this space, one of the great things about being an investor is getting to see sort of everything as it's developing. What's your perspective on it?
Sure. So I think I'm looking at this a bit differently. In a sense, I think that all the technological tools to work with fungi, to improve fungi, to explore this diversity have been around for, let's say, 10, 15 years. Genomics is not new. About 10 years ago, or high throughput screening, all these approaches. When I worked 10 years ago at an agtech company going for GM crops, we had a first slide showing, the reduction of cost of genomics, which is like why the time is now, because then the technology, the actual capabilities emerge. So I think a lot of the things people are doing now, they could have done 10 years ago in terms of technology. They could have sequenced, they could have do hydro tuning, they could have, fermented. All of the fermenters are not that different than they were 10, 15 years ago in terms of the basic technology. So I really thought a lot about this question, and I think the market driver actually was key to the booming ecosystem we're seeing now, and less the pure technological change per se. That is, all of this could have been done, as I said, 10 years ago, but people want to do it now because now the market is there, because the consumers is there, because the plant-based burgers are not there. So taking all of this into account, now people are really opening their eyes and wanting to scratch the surface and explore this amazing mycelium diversity and domesticate these strains, optimize these strains, making them grow on side streams, making them, optimizing the way we do solid state, which is also not a new technique in its own. But so everything was always there, but now we're kind of connecting the dots and really going for it, just because the market really timing is just right. So I think this is actually an advantage. You don't need to invent a new technology, just have to apply all these amazing capabilities developed elsewhere, developed for genomics, developed for pharma, for fermentation. You can just apply it and to do this to a space that is, again, premature and just haven't been explored to date. So this is kind of our perspective on this, which means there's a lot of potential and there are the tools to do it.
Yeah, exciting. Well, as I sort of anticipated, this whole conversation is making me hungry. And thinking about tempeh as a composite product, just to date myself, when I worked at the co-op when I was in graduate school, I was part of the team that made the tempeh fresh on Saturday mornings, so that so that the co-op, we cut it into squares. It was a lot of fun. It was actually it's a lot of fun to ferment, as you guys both know. One of the things, thinking about that composite product, and then thinking about sort of where plant-based alternative proteins are right now, there's a lot of criticism in the space around fillers and additives, and these types of products are not, they seem a bit more synthetic than they do plant-based. I have a sense that fungi and mycelium are different. Certainly, Isabella, the work that you're doing at Bosque Foods, I know, the whole cut really essentially means you're not smushing it up and doing something else with it. But I was thinking, Isabella and Paul, maybe just for the audience, say a little bit about that, maybe the authenticity of what you're trying to do with fungi and mycelium, and why that's a little bit different from what we're seeing right now in plant-based foods.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, do you want me to jump in first? Okay.
Happy either way.
Okay. So I think it's a great question. And the way I look at it is that the plant-based products that are out there are, for the most part, not all of them, and there's a lot that are coming, into the scene that are working on being more clean label and less processed, and that's fantastic. But traditionally, the plant-based products that are on shelves are packed with synthetic chemicals and additives and fillers and binders and so on, for the most part, because they need to, in order to replicate the texture and the taste and the sensory experience of meat. A lot of consumers, as you said, they're having issues with that, meaning they want to reduce their meat consumption. They want to do something that's either good for their health or good for the environment, but they don't feel good about the products that they're putting in their bodies, right? And for us, and I'm sure for Paul as well, mycelium and working with mycelium or working with fungi and fermentation is a very good solution to address that specific issue with plant-based alternatives that are on the market. The reason why for us that is the case is that As I mentioned, we work with solid state fermentation, meaning we're inoculating our substrate with our fungi, and we grow structures of mycelium that are pure mycelium. And they're literally, they're actually the structures that we will harvest and that will become the meat alternative later. One of the reasons we decided to go in the direction of solid state as opposed to liquid state, because that was also, R&D that we've done, that I did a few years ago, was because one, I was just fascinated with solid state. I just, for me, it was like I was always just more interested in that, because I think there is actually a lot to do on the technology side. There are very good solutions to scale liquid state fermentation, as Paul said before, but for solid state fermentation producing the type of mycelium we do, we actually do need to build the technology to be able to scale it and to be able to achieve the unit economics that we need to compete with animal meat. So for me, that's exciting because it's almost like undiscovered territory, and we just need to, it's a big problem to solve. But also it's because once we harvest our mycelium, the product is very close as we can be to a finished product, right? And that means less processing. It means we're able to produce products that are cleaner label, that are healthier, more nutrient dense. What that also means is that we're not going to be able to, it's not really our aim to create products that are mimicking meat in terms of the way that they, look, taste, and in every sensory experience, as some plant-based products do, right? You have 3D printed plant-based meats, which look like steak or they look like a salmon fillet. And I think that's incredible because the consumer is going to look at that and say, and some consumers are really going to be attracted to that. But we are appealing to that subset of consumers who want products that don't necessarily need to look and bleed like meat, but they want them to check certain experiences, right? I almost use Oatly as an example here because I'm a diehard fan of Oatly. And I think that they did such an amazing job at creating a product that really attracted major mass consumers to if not, completely converting to a plant-based product, to getting it in addition to their milk, right? They created, Oatly is not trying to taste like milk. It's trying to create something that's delicious, that functions amazingly, right? It's cost competitive. It works in all the same ways that you would use milk, but it doesn't have to taste like dairy milk itself. We're trying to do something very similar. We're not trying to taste like a steak, but we're trying to check all the boxes for consumers that will make them buy our product in addition or instead of their meat, right? Yeah. At this stage. And then I have one more comment, but Paul, I don't want to steal the spotlight here. So you go and then maybe I'll follow up.
I don't want to, if you have one more comment, please go ahead, Isabella. I do have a lot of thoughts that I'm eager to share them, but I'd love for you to finish if you would like.
It was actually after one of the comments you made in the beginning. And I think it's so important to also realize that we're at a very specific point in time, right? That we're creating products that maybe won't be necessary 50 years or 100 years down the line, right? What will consumers want, decades from now when they're more used to having alternative proteins, right? Maybe we won't need to create products that look and taste and, bleed like meat. But we need to produce and to give consumers options so that they can slowly make that transition, right? So I think that's also something to keep in mind when we're looking at the industry, that there's a lot of different things that are coming onto the market, and maybe they're not going to be the longest term solutions, but they're what consumers need today to be able to make that switch. Yeah.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and we'll only share a few of them for time consumption purposes. First and foremost, I actually think that most consumers really don't care about the so-called long ingredient lists. The studies show they don't care. A new study out of Purdue University where they tested this, they showed the Beyond Meat ingredient deck, and it had no impact on the average consumer's desire to purchase the product or not. People just don't care. I mean, people who walk into Burger King and they're thinking about getting a regular Whopper or an Impossible Whopper are not wondering, oh, is there methyl cellulose in the Impossible Whopper? Just don't care. I mean, just to be honest, these are just not what drive consumer purchasing habits. The things that drive consumers to purchase are, does it taste great? Is it cost effective for me? And is it convenient for me? And so while it's very true, the premise of the question is true, and I totally agree with Isabella, like our mycelium is a whole food. It's all natural, it's a whole food. Like if you make plant-based meat, it's not a whole food. You have to grow the field of peas, harvest the field, mill it into a flour, strip out the fiber, strip out the fat, subject it to extrusion. Like there's all these things you have to do that create the processed food that plant-based meat is today. With our mycelium that we grow at the Better Meat Co, it's a whole food. We don't do any of that. We take it from the fermenter, we dry it and we chop it up. That's literally the product. And the difference though is that what we do is we are trying to mimic the meat experience, if not improve upon it. And so you can use our base ingredient of mycelium that we produce to create a crab cake or a fish stick or a chicken breast or a steak or even foie gras. All these different ways that we can manipulate the whole food simply with hydration ratios and different ways of pressing it and so on, but while still maintaining it in a whole food state. And that creates, I think, a lot of versatility. And so in the same way that you can use, let's say, pea protein to make crab cakes or fish sticks or burgers, et cetera, you can use our mycelium to do the same thing, use a lot fewer ingredients, keep it whole food, and have it be a more natural product. Mm-hmm. Now, whether consumers will care about this, I think there's a subset of them who do. But I think it's a small minority. I think most people who are going to fast food and shopping at big box grocery stores are not so concerned about whether something's a whole food or whether it's an isolate or not. But we're proud that our product is a whole food, and I think it's better for you. I think the nutrition is better. It's better in fiber and all these other ways. I do think it's better for you. But I am less optimistic that there's the mainstream consumer out there for whom that's like a major purchasing factor.
Yeah.
Maya, I want, do you have thoughts here, please?
Yeah, actually, we're more and more kind of oriented towards the approach that Isabella presented in terms of, if somebody doesn't want to eat meat, why should its plant-based or mycelium-based burger look and taste like meat? So we're very intrigued with this concept of having like new types of product, new food products, which have kind of the nutritional and mouthfeel aspects of meat, but don't look like meat, don't smell like meat, and don't try to mimic meat in any way, but find their own product. I met a cultured cell company today that's doing something like that, and he told me we're creating like a Cheerios. You don't know what's in a Cheerio, but you know what's a Cheerio. So they're creating their own Cheerios in a sense. And I like that definition about like not having a burger, a steak, a nugget, but having, I don't know, just something else that everybody knows what it is. I think that's an intriguing thought and a huge potential for mycelium companies to create these kind of out of the box, crazy, novel food types, their own Cheerios in a sense. So I think it's something that we're really exploring. We're not seeing that many companies going there. Again, the mainstream, which is still, companies raising a lot of money and doing very well, of those mimicking the food products and, selling and everything is good. But I think that's kind of a novel concept, which has a lot of potential for further innovation. And it can be product innovation, of course, also tech innovation underlining it. So this is a bit of our thoughts on this subject in terms of Peakbridge. Yeah.
I think to poorly paraphrase Michael Pollan, there's a lot of foods that we eat that our grandmothers wouldn't recognize as foods. And I know, thinking about what's in my pantry right now, I don't know if Cheetos would be considered food 100 years ago, but I love them and I eat them probably more than I should. Isabella and Paul, you each have a little bit different approaches to how you go to market. And, famously, at least in this industry, Impossible and Beyond use two different strategies to go to market. How do you think about that? And how do you think about what's right for your company?
So for Bosque Foods, what our strategy is that over the coming year, we want to be able to co-develop products almost with chefs and restaurants. So really being able to have feedback from culinary experts and people who are, progressive, mission-aligned chefs and restaurants. And the idea there is that's not really going to market. That's not really selling. That's really more creating a product and being able to get people on our side that can also open doors into the food service industry, which means that the next step when we do want to go to market is to work with restaurants first. And there's a few reasons for that. We want to also match our production capacity with the types of vendors that we're going to be going for. So our soft launch into the market will be with progressive restaurants and, restaurants that share our mission in food service. The end goal is to be able to get to retail though. So, my vision when I started this was really, I want to see this on supermarket shelves, where it can be in the hands of consumers, where they're bringing this home and cooking it, and, helping replace a center of the plate meat with our product. So that is the end goal. But, just to give you a little bit of the thinking into that, we have to scale our production over the next couple of years. And that's not going to be instant. It's going to take time, because working with microorganisms and scaling your process, getting it to the same level of efficiency at each stage that you scale to, it takes time. And in particular, as I was mentioning, with this type of solid state fermentation, we have to build the technology that is going to allow us to scale, actually. So, I think what differentiates Bosque from some other companies out there that are maybe working with solid state fermentation, or maybe are working more with mushrooms, is that we are also building the tech that's going to allow us to scale. So that's a huge hurdle. That's also, what excites us most about what we're working on, is that we're not only building the ability to produce our products, but we're also then producing the products themselves. So that will take time. And for that reason, we match our go-to-market with the capacity that we're expected to be able to produce at that time. I know that is, vastly different than probably what most liquid fermentation companies can do, because as Paul mentioned, or at least from my understanding, it's almost a plug and play solution. You can purchase fermentation tanks, and yes, there's CapEx, but it's much quicker, I think, to scale. And so maybe that opens doors to being able to commercialize in different ways, probably. Yeah. But Paul, I don't want to speak for you. So.
That's okay. In the mycelium space, right now, if you are a company that is making alt meat, whether you're a huge company or a small company, you basically have three options. You can use pea, wheat, or soy. And we want to be the first ingredients provider that will offer you mycelium to be able to power your product. We are partnered with companies like Hormel Foods, who we sell product to, because we want to help the big meat companies use fewer animals. And so our goal is not to create products that are going to, let's say, compete against Impossible or Beyond. Frankly, we would like to sell to Impossible and Beyond. We want to empower our customers to create a better, more convincing meat experience than what they can do with plant proteins, or even animal protein, to be honest with you. So what we are doing is essentially creating a new model in the mycelium space, where instead of creating a CPG brand where we want to see better meat co-products on store shelves, we want to be selling mycelium to startups, to big food companies, and more. And I've used that not only because I think we can have a bigger impact in the world. Like, I don't think the world is any better off if we take away market share from Impossible Foods. Like, it doesn't really achieve our goal of helping to reduce humanity's footprint on the planet. We want to reduce the number of animals used for food. And so I think by supplying a lot of these companies, especially the big meat companies, with mycelium, that we can more effectively do that. I'd also note, just from a pragmatic perspective, of course, most startups fail. And so if you're trying to create a brand, it's really hard to do. So you're not only trying to create a brand, you're also trying to get the science and everything else done, which is really, really hard to do. And this is why, startups have these really high mortality rates, especially infant mortality rates. And if we're selling to a variety of companies, I think we have a better chance of success than if we are the ones trying to thread that needle to be the new brand that everybody is going to want. You could have great science and great product, but if you mess up on the marketing or your supply chain or whatever the case may be, you might still end up failing. And so by taking a pickaxe approach, as opposed to being the gold rushers ourselves, I think we have a better chance of success, to be honest with you. B2B companies fail too, of course, but we want to be like the Cargill of mycelium. So, right now you can go to Cargill and you can get a variety of product for your ingredients for your products. Well, when you come to the Better Meat Co., we want to be a massive powerhouse, selling at first hundreds of millions of dollars of ingredients and eventually billions of dollars of ingredients to food companies, and we'll have an entire mycelial menu to choose from, different strains for different purposes, like what I mentioned earlier. And I think that'll reduce the risk of our own failure. And don't get me wrong, look, doing startups is very hard. Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz has a great line that I love where he says that when you start your own company, you will sleep like a baby because you'll wake up every 2 hours and cry. And I can tell you, like, I totally understand that. My wife jokes with me about that all the time. It's like, this is hard. It's so hard. I say, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. But I do think that our B2B model reduces the risk that we face and gives us a better chance of success and a better chance to actually achieve our mission.
Maya, one of the questions from the audience, I think really hits on one of the most important questions in the space, which is, what are some of the biggest bottlenecks and challenges that you see? And so when you're talking to companies, what are kind of the things you're looking for and trying to see if people have solved?
A great question. So I think for us, we have a very kind of defined criteria as to what we're looking for in a company. One of the key aspects is technological innovation. So we're seeking companies that really solved one of the technological bottlenecks or challenges, let's say, of the space. And as we looked into the space, I think a lot of it is around the strain and the selection of the strain, optimization of the strains. So companies bringing like really novel strains or adapting strains to grow on different feedstock, like side streams. For us, this is kind of a key challenge. When you solve it, you have really also a competitive advantage in a way. It's also a lot about scale up, like Isabella said, especially in solid state. It's about, ability to scale up in an efficient way and having the infrastructure to allow it. So this is another challenge that is, of course, very, very critical when you look at that space. Another bottleneck, I think, is related to companies that are going for more B2C approach, which is, if you have a great product, you have everything set, but doesn't mean you will succeed. So actually our approach is we're more looking for B2B oriented business models in order to actually bypass this change and having a lot of experience in scaling up such businesses in a way. And last, another bottleneck, as always, is regulation. I think all of the people here were gonna, in a sense, we're talking about this really painful topic. I think this is regulation is kind of the opposite of innovation in a way, or restrict the innovation. It's like all of us, when we're talking of R&D and fungi diversity, we would like to take these crazy strains, we like to engineer them to do exactly what we want and do a lot of these kind of modifications to make it like the best fungi, the strain for the best product. But, then regulation would be nightmare or couldn't even allow it to reach the market. So this is a key aspect. Of course, in some it's different per geography, but it is always a bottleneck. But in this space, it's something really important. So for us, there's a trade-off. On one hand, when you work in a strain where they prove the known, eventually it's less innovative. You can, something that's already there, like the corn strain, for instance. So it's about maybe workaround, sometimes adaptations that help it still grow in different, again, feedstock, or the way you grow it, or the way you combine it, the way you look at it as a final product would be not a burger or like the new Cheerios. This could be a kind of type of innovation, but regulation is a huge bottleneck.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we have time for one more quick lightning round question. And I've asked this before on a food themed webinar, and we've got some investments in the longevity space. So we're going to hold you to these answers. In 100 years, will we still kill animals for dinner? I'll go kind of in order. So Isabella.
Oh gosh, I hope not. I think a little bit pragmatically, I do think that people will still kill some animals for food or for certain purposes. I would love it if they wouldn't, but I think realistically, what I would hope, if people still need to do that for whatever their purposes are, we can't control all of humanity. My hope is that it would be very, very limited, and to the point where it's for just the most luxury, where you're, I don't know, for like, unfortunately, I think it will still happen. I hope it's very, very limited and that we have the ability to be able to replace, 90 or more % of why we're using animal products today. I think we can do that.
Hopefully no, but probably yes.
Probably yes, hopefully at a limited, very, very, very limited scale. That would be my hope. Yeah.
Paul, you have a thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm gonna take a little bit more time than that just to say, look, we still have some people who use horse-drawn carriages. So if you had said 100 years ago, well, people still be using horse-drawn carriages 100 years from now, you could say, well, there might be a few people who do, but nearly nobody will. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think, yeah, sure, maybe you'll have some people who absolutely insist that they torment and kill animals for food. But I think most people will be quite pleased that we no longer do it. I mean, just look at 100 years ago, the type of things that our society was debating. It was only 100 years ago that more than half of the American population even got the right to vote, women. It was only like 50 or 60 years ago that we were debating, like really debating as a matter of societal debate, whether whites and blacks ought to be able to share the same drinking fountains at all. And so if you think about what a blink of an eye ago, historically speaking, were like actual social debates, and today we consider them, how could anybody have ever but otherwise, like supported, denying women's suffrage or racial segregation? Like you hold those views today, you'd be a pariah. Whereas I think in the future, people may start to think pretty unkindly on how we treated animals in our era. And they may think that we are so glad that there were innovators like Bozque Foods and the Better Meat Co. and others who pioneered methods that reduced our reliance and eventually rendered the slaughter of animals totally obsolete. In the same way that we no longer slaughter whales to light our homes because we got kerosene and eventually light bulbs. In the same way, we don't live anymore to write letters. We just use metal fountain pens. Because of mycelial fermentation and other types of alternative meats, we will render the widespread exploitation of animals for food effectively obsolete.
All right, and last but not least, Maya, do you want to go on the record here?
Yeah, sure. I think it depends. It depends how far the alternative will go. If the alternative will be really tasty, really affordable, that is, if cultured meat, for example, will become a reality and you can get the same steak without killing a cow, so we will not kill the cows anymore, So I think I don't have a clear cut. It really depends on how well people like these guys will do with their products. So it's up to you guys.
I love it. I love
No
it.
pressure.
Throwing it right back at the technologists. This has been
thank
such
you
a
everyone
great
for
session.
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Amy, for hosting with me. And thank you to the audience for watching. This has been a lot of fun, and hope you'll join us in the future for our next webinar.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.